Hey guys, let's start with the story tonight. After digital archivist Emily discovers bizarre documents predicting future events by deceased analysts at the National Archives at Greenwich, she follows the clues to uncover the secret of MI6's Cold War-era Phantom program, uploading analyst consciousnesses to a quantum network to predict the future. She learns that her father faked his death to infiltrate the network and later tried to prevent a greater crisis by creating a necessary disaster. Ultimately, she takes over the program in a dilemma, only to find that her own future has long been predicted, trapping her as a prisoner of time. So before you get comfortable, please take a second to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to see people from all over the world joining us. The temperature control system at the National Archives in Greenwich was forever precise at 19 degrees Celsius. Dry air moved through the maze-like corridors, carrying the distinct must of old paper, the heavy tang of aged ink, and the cold metallic scent from the filing cabinets, slowly flowing beneath the high vaulted ceilings. The incandescent lights along the corridors were dimmed to a low glow. The yellow light cast crisscrossing shadows on the dark gray cabinets, each row standing like a silent giant in the hush. Emily Shaw pressed her fingertips to the cold metal cabinet door. The chill spread from her fingers to her wrist, briefly dispelling some of the fatigue brought on by long hours of work. It was the third week since she had been reassigned as a digital archive specialist, and most of her time had been spent scanning, classifying, and archiving paper records from the 1980s. The repetitive clicking, scanning, and naming dulled her rational brain, trained for logical inference and detail, almost to stagnation, until a document labeled draft unexpectedly entered her view. The scanned image on the screen had edges slightly yellowed and brittle. The texture at the paper's creases was faithfully reproduced by the scanner, as if one could feel the grooves left by time. The header bore only the scrawled words retro entry, 1984 to 2007, with no standardized classification number, no clear confidentiality marking, not even a precise filing date, as if it had been deliberately smudged away. Emily at first assumed it was a discarded draft or a fragment of an analyst's informal notes. She clicked to enlarge the file and casually scanned its contents, but she froze the instant she reached a key sentence. Even her breathing halted for half a beat. The document, written in a calm, objective tone, detailed a collapse at an abandoned mine in northern Scotland that would occur at 3:27 a.m. on July 19, 1984. It specified the exact time of collapse, the names of the 3 trapped miners, the spots where rock loosenings would occur during rescue, the best rescue routes, and even the tragic outcome that only one person could be saved. The signature date on the file was clearly marked March 17, 1982, and the name in the signature line was none other than Thomas West. The name struck Emily like an ice needle through the heart, freezing her body. While organizing Cold War-era records, she had encountered that name multiple times. Thomas West, a former senior strategic analyst at the National Archives who specialized in international affairs and major event simulations, whose precise judgments had been highly valued by MI6. He had died in 1959 of late-stage lung cancer at age 48. How could someone who had been dead for 23 years have written a document in 1982 predicting an event 2 years later? The timeline's total collapse assaulted her rational understanding. She rubbed her eyes, thinking prolonged screen time had produced a hallucination, but the signature remained stubbornly clear when she looked again. The dated signature had not changed. Reason told her it might be a coincidence of names or a later forgery by pranksters. After all, forging handwriting was technically possible. But as a veteran digital archive specialist, Emily had an unusual sensitivity and judgment for handwriting. Her father, Alan Shaw, had been a top Cold War physicist who left behind many experiment notes and notebooks. Over the years, she had become adept at discerning his emotional state and the context of his writing from subtle variations in his handwriting. She inhaled, forced herself to calm down, and used the archive's database to pull up scans of Thomas West's handwriting from when he was alive, his final 1958 strategic analysis and letters to his family. She screenshot the signature portions of both documents and overlaid them with professional comparison software, adjusting contrast and transparency. The image on the screen chilled her. The starting angles, the pressure at stroke ends, the tiny linking habits between letters, even the tilt arc of the W in West were identical, no stiffness of imitation, appearing to be written by the same hand, as if at the same moment and in the same condition. "Impossible," Emily whispered, voice trembling. Her fingers whitened from gripping the keyboard. She expanded the search beyond Thomas West and mind collapse, trying keywords like retro entry, draft, and deceased signature, and adjusted the time filters. Results refreshed rapidly, and 21 documents labeled draft were uncovered, spanning from 1958 to 1998, 40 years of records. She opened them one by one. The contents were varied and horrifying. The assassination time, place, and assassin of a South American politician in 1963. The precise outbreak point and scope of the 1973 global oil crisis. The breakthrough direction of a 1989 semiconductor core technology. The spread path and most damaged sectors of the 1997 Asian financial crisis. Each document was terrifyingly precise, as if written after events had happened rather than years before. More chillingly, signatures on each page belonged to different deceased analysts. There was Elliot Carter, an economic advisor who died suddenly of a heart attack in 1965. His handwriting appeared on the 1973 oil crisis prediction. Ronald King, a military strategist who died in a 1971 car crash, signed a 1980 regional conflict simulation. Evelyn White, a tech forecasting expert who died in 1980, left a draft predicting a 1989 semiconductor breakthrough. Emily spent nearly 2 hours verifying the handwriting authenticity and event specifics, pulling classified archives from deep storage and contacting MI6's historical data interfaces. Her permissions allowed only partial public records. The deeper she checked, the colder she felt. More than 91% of the document's predictions had come true, and some secret core details matched classified records exactly. This was beyond mere prediction. Someone had apparently written history in advance, and events unfolded accordingly. These were not predictions so much as pre-written historical records, composed with an undeniable certainty. And yet, the writers were people buried decades ago. Emily leaned back, closed her eyes to try to sort the chaos in her head, but thoughts connected into snarled threads. The cold air from the vents brushed her face, and she shivered. A ridiculous but persistent thought rose in her mind. Could these people's consciousnesses still exist somewhere, continuing to write the future? She drew a deep breath to pull herself from the line of thought. Speculation was pointless. The key evidence was the original paper. Only a physical inspection could let experts test paper production dates, ink composition, and aging to rule out post-dating or forgery. She smoothly submitted a request in the archive management system to retrieve the original document, entering the file number. Her finger hovered over the confirm key. Then she pressed. The system loaded for several seconds, but didn't show the expected retrieval confirmation. Instead, red text appeared like an impassable gulf. Insufficient permissions. Retrieval denied. Her stomach sank. She held an A-level clearance sufficient to access most Cold War files, and could normally apply for temporary elevated access for top-secret documents awaiting approval. She had never before encountered a direct denial that prevented even an application. Emily rose quickly and strode to the archive's management room. Old Administrator Frank, wearing reading glasses, was sorting a newly filed paper document, gently rubbing the yellowed paper as if handling delicate treasure. "Frank, could you check the storage location for file D1982-0317? It's labeled retro entry, draft," Emily asked, her voice carrying an urgent edge. Frank looked up, pushed up his glasses, and after a pause nodded and typed the number. His brow furrowed, and confusion creased his face as he checked repeatedly, consulting a paper catalog. "This file is marked as being in Vault 7, he said slowly. "But Emily, we don't have a Vault 7. "What?" Emily's voice rose, then dropped as she glanced around to ensure no one else was present. Could the number be wrong? Maybe an extra digit was entered, or an old vault was renumbered. She clung to the hope it was a clerical error. Frank shook his head, then carefully pulled an aging blueprint from a cabinet and laid it on the table. The paper's edges were curled and the blue lines faded but legible. "Here, these are the original plans from when the archive was built. It's been renovated a few times, but the number and layout of the vaults haven't changed. From construction until now, there have only been 6 vaults across 3 underground levels, numbered 1 through 6. He pointed to the blueprint showing the 3 underground floors, each with clearly labeled 6 vaults. Where Vault 7 should have been, there was a blank space, no lines, as if someone had deliberately erased it. Emily leaned over the blueprint and felt the paper's rough surface. Her unease swelled. Someone had concealed certain records, and the non-existent Vault 7 was more than a numbering error. It seemed to be the hidden gateway to everything. She returned to her office heavy with thought. No sooner had she sat than an anonymous email popped up on her screen. There was no sender, no subject, and the send time read unknown, as if it had appeared from nowhere. She opened it. The body contained a single line in cold song-type font. "Stop investigating. They are watching." Those 8 characters were like a dagger. She looked reflexively at the surveillance camera in the corner, its black lens quiet with a faint red light pulsing like an ever-watchful eye. She shrank back in her chair, as though that might shield her from being observed. But she knew that once noticed, escape would not be easy. Fear crept up like vines along her spine. At that moment, the image of her father's strange suicide flashed vividly before her. 5 years earlier, she had received a police call and rushed to his private laboratory. She found him on the floor, a pistol beside him, blood on his white lab coat, and a short note in messy handwriting reading, "Everything is out of control. I must pay the price." The police had ruled it a suicide, citing prolonged experimental stress and a mental breakdown. But Emily had never believed it. Her father was resolute and had said science's purpose was to protect, not to destroy. He wouldn't have taken his life. The weird files, the non-existent vault, and the anonymous warning coalesced into a web trapping her. She recognized that her father's death might have been connected to these secrets. That night she tosses in bed, unable to sleep, the anonymous warning looping in her head. At 1 a.m. her phone rang, the shrill sound piercing the silence. A foreign-looking number flashed. She hesitated, then answered. The voice on the other end was old, hoarse, breathy, with a faint electrical hiss. "Emily Shaw? I'm Arthur Benson, former archive custodian. I know you're looking into the retro entries, and I know about your father, Alan Shaw." The name jolted her awake. She had seen Arthur Benson's name in staff records. He had been the confidential archives custodian but abruptly resigned in 1991 and vanished without a trace. They arranged to meet at a secluded old cafe on the outskirts, surrounded by abandoned factories and sparse nighttime foot traffic. The cafe's interior was dim, walls hung with faded photographs and wooden tables worn by time, the air scented with coffee and tobacco. Emily arrived early and sat by the window, eyes fixed on the door. After a few minutes, a stooped old man entered in a faded dark coat. Hair thin and white, face creased with deep wrinkles, cautious yet alert, Arthur Benson. He sat, scanning the room before speaking in a barely audible voice. "Those files belong to Project Shade. It was an MI6 collaboration with top neuroscientists, so secret that few knew. I sorted parts of Project Shade's files, but when I saw things I shouldn't, I was forced out and threatened to never reveal anything." "Project Shade? What is it?" are the deceased analysts and the documents related to it? Emily pressed, leaning forward, anxiety and need for answers in her eyes. She had a sense the truth was being uncovered, and that it might be darker than she could imagine. I don't know everything. Only a few had full clearance. Arthur picked up his coffee, his fingers trembling. The core was about consciousness and the future. Those dead analysts' signatures weren't forged, they were written by them. Or rather, by their consciousnesses. Your father, Alan Shaw, was the chief neuroscientist on Project Shade. He led the consciousness scanning and uploading research. I handled organizing some of the files and was forced out afterward. When he killed himself, I knew it was connected to the project. He hadn't killed himself. He was disappeared. Hearing her father's name, Emily clutched at the table. Arthur's next words made his expression suddenly fearful. He stood abruptly, eyes darting to the door. They're coming. Remember, Vault 7 isn't non-existent. It's hidden. The entrance is in an old ventilation duct on the archive's third basement level and requires a specific password to open. Also, check your father's workshop. He must have left clues. Before she could respond, he hurriedly left. Emily looked to the door and saw two men in black suits standing there. Their expressions were blank and their gaze swept the room toward her. They were clearly after her and Arthur. Emily quickly paid, slipped out a back door and fled in her car. She glimpsed the two men standing by the curb staring at her taillights and sped away. Only after confirming she had shaken any tails did she breathe. She drove straight to her father's old workshop located in an aging country villa surrounded by dense trees. The yard was overrun with knee-high weeds and vines clung to the walls. The rusted gate grumbled as it opened. Inside, the air smelled of dust, old paper, and chemical reagents, familiar and painful. Sunlight filtered through dusty windows, casting mottled light across the floor. Bookshelves brimmed with physics texts, experiment notes, and journals. The desk held an old computer whose keys still bore her father's fingerprints and a pile of encrypted files with yellowed covers. Emily opened the bottom drawer and found a black diary bearing her father's name, Alan Shaw, in gold-stamped letters. The diary was locked with a small oxidized padlock. She tried birthdays, lab numbers, project code names, dozens of combinations, nothing worked. Remembering Arthur's words and her father's papers that referenced a quantum computing construct called the Eternal Array, the core vehicle for his consciousness upload research, Emily entered the phrase's acronym, Eternal Array, into the lock, clicked open. Her heart raced. Her father's hidden records would now be revealed. Inside the diary were records that unlocked decades-old memories. The pages, yellowed, showed her father's handwriting growing from neat to messy, documenting his involvement in Project Shade and his increasing torment. In 1975, at the height of the Cold War, Britain sought tools to foresee and steer events. MI6 teamed with neuroscientists in a secret program to capture and upload consciousnesses. Alan was recruited as chief neuroscientist to develop consciousness scanning and uploading. The plan's goal was audacious: upload the minds of 17 near-death top analysts into a closed quantum compute network, the Eternal Array, so their pure minds could continue analyzing massive datasets and simulate future event probabilities, advising government decision-making. The diary recorded each experimental stage and her father's anguish. Early animal trials gave way to human preparations. He witnessed lives sacrificed. Today we scanned the third experimental dog. Its mind uploaded successfully, then spiraled into cognitive disorder after 10 minutes and dissolved. Watching its body lose vitality, I first doubted whether we were protecting national security or conducting an unethical slaughter. He described the analysts, some volunteers out of patriotism, others coerced without full disclosure, whose consciousnesses were trapped in a cold virtual space with no sensory input or sense of time. They were forced into endless analysis, ghosts imprisoned in a cage. His entries showed mounting moral conflict. Later pages grew more frenzied. Ink blotches and smudged marks indicated tears. They are not predicting the future. They are choosing it. The government stopped accepting passive simulations and started intervening to make the most favorable probabilities real. They manipulate wars and engineer disasters. The consciousnesses are the sharpest instruments. The cost is that souls cannot rest. Long-term imprisonment and forced work produced cognitive mutations. Mania, paranoia, loss of reason. I must stop this, or the consequences will be unbearable. Those lines were the last coherent thoughts before her handwriting trailed off, leaving blank pages. It suggested he intended a drastic course of action. Emily closed the diary and felt tears blur her vision. She realized her father's suicide wasn't accidental. He must have discovered Project Shade's darkest uses and faked his death to continue resisting from the shadows. The strange retro entries were outputs from the imprisoned minds in the Eternal Array, used by the government to manipulate outcomes. Her father had risked everything to expose or undermine it. Emily resolved to finish what he started, to reveal Project Shade and free the trapped consciousnesses. She contacted a hacker friend, Jack, a top-tier practitioner who had helped recover damaged digital archives before. Jack was stunned when she told him the plan but agreed to help. With his custom tools, they targeted decommissioned military servers that once housed Project Shade's data. The defense-grade encryption was a hybrid of Cold War military ciphers and modern quantum protocols. They worked together, one cracking layers of crypto, the other tracing data remains, for 4 hours before breaching the last barrier. A flood of files poured into their screen. The recovered files detailed Project Shade's full scope: origin, objectives, experimental methods, and operational controls. Between 1975 and 1991, 17 analysts' consciousnesses had been captured in near-death states and uploaded into a quantum-entangled closed network, the Eternal Array. The network could simulate multiple timelines and future probabilities, and the consciousnesses, using extraordinary analytical abilities, sifted vast data streams and produced retro entries, as reports signed in their hands, which were delivered to MI6 leadership and influenced Britain's diplomatic, military, and economic decisions. The array initially spared the nation from crises and provided strategic advantage. Over time, however, things went wrong. The imprisonment damaged the minds. Deprived of external stimuli, lacking sunrise or time flow, they suffered cognitive breakdown. Some stuck in endless loops replaying simulations. Others became aggressive and tried to sabotage the array. Still others became disintegrated fragments of mind. To prevent contamination of the array, the government enacted a brutal pruning policy to remove unstable consciousnesses. Essentially a cold, digital execution. The files describe this under a chilling section. Pruning must be quick and efficient, employing quantum pulses to irreversibly dismantle aberrant minds and prevent their spread, ensuring the purity and stability of the Eternal Array to protect national interests. The words pierced Emily's heart. Behind the technical language were the suffering of 17 souls and a government that sacrificed lives for power. Into the 21st century, the files showed ambition had grown. The government moved from passive use of the array to actively manufacturing advantageous futures, issuing directives that forced consciousnesses to manipulate events, engineering conflicts, disasters, and economic crises to achieve political aims. Many major incidents that appeared natural had Project Shade's fingerprints. Enraged, Emily continued searching the files for the array's physical location and found a confidential equipment deployment paper. The core servers of the Eternal Array were hidden in Vault 7 of the National Archives, the very vault whose existence had been erased from the blueprints. The file confirmed the vault's many encryption layers and that Alan Shaw, as chief scientist, had one of the backdoor passwords. This discovery thrilled and terrified Emily. This was the gateway to the truth, and she saved copies, then scrubbed their intrusion traces to leave no trace. 3 days later, she made a careful infiltration plan. She would use her work credentials to request after-hours access under the pretext of sorting 1980s digital records. When the building emptied at closing, she followed the plan, avoiding camera blind spots, and descended to the third basement. The basement was cold, damp, dusty with metallic smells. She found the old ventilation duct Arthur had described, pried off a rusted metal plate, and crawled inside. The duct was narrow, forcing her to stoop. Dust clung to her clothing. 20 meters in, she found a hidden hatch with a precision lock matching her father's diary. She typed in the backdoor password and the lock opened. Beyond the hatch, a narrow corridor with faint green emergency lights led to a faint blue glow at the far end, the server's indicator lights. She stepped into a vast machine room the size of 2 basketball courts. Racks of old server machines filled the space like a silent steel forest. Their indicator lights blinked blue like spectral fireflies. A low hum echoed. The air smelled of electronics and coolant. In the center stood an old terminal, its keys worn smooth, the very machine her father might have tuned years ago. Emily approached and ran her fingers across the keyboard. She typed the backdoor commands from the diary and executed them. The screen's green characters cascaded. The hum rose. Moments later, the code halted and a white message appeared. Connection successful. External access detected. A blurred light formed on the screen, gradually coalescing into a wavering human-shaped image. A hoarse, weary voice came through. Who is connecting to the array? Unauthorized personnel leave immediately. Emily steadied herself. I'm Emily Shaw, Alan Shaw's daughter. I mean no harm. I came for Thomas West. She felt a tremor at her father's name. The image paused as if processing the name, edges wavering. Slowly it resolved. A middle-aged man in a dark suit, gaunt with red-rimmed eyes and graying hair, Thomas West. He looked tired and wary, transparent enough to see streaming code behind him. Alan Shaw, Emily Shaw, he repeated with surprise. Alan's daughter. Is he well? We haven't felt his presence in ages. He killed himself 5 years ago, Emily said, voice breaking. But I don't believe he died. I think he's here in the array. I want to know Project Shade and what the retro entries are. And the recent entries over the past 3 years, they weren't written by you, were they? Who wrote them? West's image flickered with shock and anger. Suicide? Impossible. Alan would never do that. His voice rose with emotion. The array has gone out of control. We aren't advisors anymore, we are weapons controlled by the government. They force us to manipulate outcomes. The cognitive mutations came from endless coercive labor and pruning. And those recent entries, no, they were not written by the 17 of us. We don't know how they appeared. Who? Emily demanded, her chest tight with dread. An 18th consciousness that shouldn't exist, West answered, voice trembling. We sense it deep within the array. It's powerful, silent, watching us. It never communicates but can influence operations. We compared handwriting and found it is very similar to Alan's, almost identical. A thunderclap went off in Emily's mind. She pulled up the recent entries and overlaid the signatures with her father's last handwriting and the messy line on his final note. They matched perfectly. The hidden 18th consciousness, the ghost in the array who had been producing the precise recent entries, who manipulated events, that ghost was her father, Alan Shaw. His suicide had indeed been a ruse. His consciousness had been secretly uploaded into the array. He didn't die, he never left, West said quietly. As chief scientist, Alan reserved himself a backdoor. 5 years ago, he faked his death to escape the system and work from inside the array to undermine Project Shade. He intended to sabotage the system and protect us from pruning. But after 5 years inside, he changed. West's tone was full of concern. He began to believe that by proactively steering timelines, creating necessary disasters, he could prevent a greater world war. He is no longer content to merely disrupt. We don't know his endgame or how long he can keep his mind intact. Emily tried to ask more, but an alarm cut through the room and red lights flashed. West's image fragmented and his voice broke. They found you. Leave now. There will be a terrorist attack they will attribute to foreign forces. A necessary disaster Allen has calculated to rally the Western allies to avert larger conflict. I don't know if this is right or if he's sane. Run. The image dissolved as code scrolled on the terminal. Emily turned and ran, but at the corridor entrance, two black-suited agents stood with guns pointed at her. Their motions were mechanical and cold. "Emily Shaw, stop resisting and come with us," they said in flat tones. She knew capture would bury the truth. She lunged toward the terminal, fingers flying over the keyboard to hit the emergency shutdown. A tremor shook the racks as indicator lights died and the array began to collapse. A bullet grazed her shoulder. She staggered but fled. Amid chaos, she heard her father's voice echo. "You will regret this." Emily escaped and hid at a friend's house. Days later, news reported a terrorist attack in northern Scotland. The incident was smaller than the retro entry's predicted scale and caused a dozen injuries. The government blamed a foreign terrorist group and Western allies issued condemnations. Provoked unity had been achieved. The government claimed a server malfunction at the National Archives had damaged certain old files. Project Shade was never mentioned. Emily knew the cover-up had succeeded. Her phone was tapped and her movements monitored. She lived in hiding. One late night, a new document popped up on her personal computer, which had turned on by itself. The document detailed her actions over the next week, when she would sneak out for groceries, whom she would call, even the healing progress of the shoulder wound. The signature at the bottom was in her own handwriting. She felt cold. She recalled her father's words and the array's collapse. Part of his consciousness had migrated into her device. Moonlight leaked through her curtains and the glow of the screen cast her long shadow. Emily realized she could never escape Project Shade. Her father's mind remained with her, and the imprisoned minds would persist in some form. She had thought she destroyed a conspiracy, but instead had become the conspiracy's new vessel, a prisoner of time. The screen dimmed, reflecting Emily's pale, hopeless face. In the darkness, it seemed countless eyes watched and many consciousnesses whispered. Project Shade had not ended. It had only changed form, continuing to entangle the world and anyone who tried to uncover it. Her bond with her father would endure in that endless ghostly weave. Agents did not shoot her again. One of them motioned politely with a hand. "The project director wants to see you." They took her to a luxurious office where an elderly man in uniform sat solemnly behind a desk. "Emily Shaw, I'm Richard Hamilton, the current director of Project Shade," he said. "Your father was a brilliant scientist and a stubborn idealist. He thought he could change things, but some things cannot be reversed." Richard explained that the Eternal Array was deeply integrated with Britain's defense, diplomacy, and economic systems. Destroying it would throw the nation into chaos. Allen hid within the array for 5 years to try to sabotage it, Richard said. But he also knew its destruction would be catastrophic. He left clues for you so you could find it and assume his role to reform from inside. Emily was silent. She understood the truth. Destroying it could cause a wider collapse, but staying might allow the chance to save the captured minds and to prevent state abuses. She proposed terms. Stop pruning, treat consciousnesses humanely, and stop using the array to manufacture disasters. Richard agreed. He had long sought reform but lacked a catalyst and someone with the knowledge and integrity to effect change. He appointed Emily as the new administrator of Project Shade, responsible for daily operations and the care of consciousnesses. The next day, Emily formally took over and connected to the Eternal Array as an administrator. The instant her consciousness interfaced with the network, a torrent of information flooded her mind. She saw the status of the 17 minds, the presence of her father deep inside, and a new retro entry dated 10 years hence. It described her own death, killed in an attack targeting Project Shade. The signature was her own, aged and marked by hardship. Emily immediately disconnected, her heart pounding. She realized once more that entering this world meant never truly leaving. The game's rules bound you. Those inside were temporal prisoners. Futures had been written. Her choice to remain was constrained, yet she resolved to protect the trapped minds, even if the end had already been foretold.